This is a rebroadcast of the Eau Claire School Board meeting. The audio for this program can be heard on WRFP LP 101.9 FM.
All right, I would like to call to order the Eau Claire Area School District Board meeting. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Secretary Iverson, have we complied with the Open Meetings Law notification?
Yes, we have.
Could you please do a roll call?
Commissioner Cummins? Here. Commissioner Duax?
Here.
Commissioner Hombach-Boyle?
Here.
Commissioner Johnson?
Here.
Commissioner Spindler?
Here.
Commissioner Vu?
Here.
Commissioner Jean?
Here. Great, thank you. Next on our agenda is our public forum. I would just like to remind people on the public forum you're allowed to speak for 4 minutes to address the board. The board will not hear personal complaints about school personnel nor about any person connected to the school district. So let's see. We have one couple, looks like, signed up for the public forum. Connie Lee and Wachi Lee. You want to come to the microphone up here, please, Secretary Iverson.
Hi, we'd also like to share this poster of some pictures of my little sister. Should we, is it all right if we have it in the middle or the actual?
You could just lean it on the chairs there if you wish.
Okay.
Just put it here. No, you're fine. Go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the Board of Education. My name is Connie Lee, and this is my father, Wachu Lee. We have been long-standing members of the Eau Claire community, and we are proud to call this great city our home. On Wednesday afternoon, September 24th, between 12:15 and 12:50, my 4-year-old sister, Ashley, was picked up by the school bus from our local bus stop to attend Prairie Ridge Early Learning School. Somehow, between being picked up from school by the school bus and arriving at the school, Ashley was assaulted by another female student. It was only when the bus arrived at Prairie Ridge did her teachers notice the scratches all over her face and neck, and my father was alerted immediately. When my father arrived at the school, Ashley told him that her hair had been pulled out from her head and thrown on the floor of the school bus. I am here today to ask the Eau Claire Board of Education for assistance in obtaining some answers because we have received very minimal answers since last Friday. Since the incident occurred, we have tried to contact the principal and student transit to understand what happened on the bus ride that morning. We understand that the school is not responsible for what happens on the school bus. However, according to your parent-student handbook, on page 21 it states, school buses are the extension of the school, and bullying, teasing, threatening, or harassing are hurtful and will not be tolerated. While we understand that the school may not be responsible for what happened, because the Eau Claire School District is contracted with student transit, we are calling on the Board of Education to help us obtain some answers. Student transit has not cooperated with us thus far, and we are extremely upset that no one is responding to us or taking Ashley's situation seriously. It is shameful that with all the national attention to bullying and the preventative measures that schools are taking nowadays, that this is allowed to happen in our very own community. With that being said, the school buses have 2 adult chaperones on them at all times, a bus driver and a bus monitor. The children wear harnesses, and it is the bus monitor's responsibility to buckle them in securely for their safety and unbuckle them once they arrive at the school. If a bus monitor has to unbuckle the child so that they can get off the school bus, how did they neglect to see that a child who they had buckled in without any scratches was being unbuckled with scratches and did not take the immediate action themselves, but instead let the child get off the bus and enter the school? No one wants to take responsibility or make an apology, and it is unacceptable that this has happened to my little sister and that it can happen to another child. I want to ask the Eau Claire Board of Education how the Eau Claire School District intends to keep children safe so that instances like this do not happen on school buses again. We want the school district to work together with student transit to prevent bullying, harassment, and assault from happening. One thing we have learned from this entire experience is that the communication between the schools and the bus company is simply not there. Although the principal doesn't believe that what happened to Ashley is bullying because it needs to happen more than once, I'd like to ask, how can you allow a 4-year-old child to go through this more than once? Please look at these pictures and ask yourself this question. Ashley is afraid of going to school, and she has become fearful of riding the bus. October is National Bullying Prevention Month. Today, Monday, October 6th, is World Blue Shirt Day of Bully Prevention. My father and I are both wearing blue in honor of my little sister Ashley and anyone who has ever been bullied. If there's ever a time to discuss bullying and violence on school buses, the time is now. Our community needs to be aware of this situation, and if it can happen to my little sister Ashley, then it can happen to your children too. We want to know that our children will be protected once we put them in the hands of bus drivers, bus monitors, and school teachers. We are calling on the Board of Education to begin the dialogue and implement new policies that will protect all of our children from being harmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Okay, that was the only group for public forum. So next on our agenda, we have the superintendent's report. Superintendent Hardebeck.
Thank you. And good evening, everyone. I'd like to go through the calendar for the upcoming Board of Education events. Today, the Policy and Governance Committee had their meeting here at 10:30 a.m. And that was followed at 5:30 by a closed session and then a regular meeting that we're in right now. On October 8th at noon, there will be a board agenda planning. On October 13th at 7:30 a.m., there's a legislative breakfast, and that breakfast is in coordination with Altoona and also with Chippewa Falls, and that will be held at the Oakleaf Hospital on October 13th at 7 p.m. at the Administration Building. There will be a meeting of the Parent Advisory Council. On October 20th at 10:30 a.m. at the Administration Building, there will be a meeting of the Policy and Governance Committee. On October 20th that evening at 7 p.m. there will be a school board meeting. On October 27th at 6 p.m. there will be a public budget hearing and special school board meeting about the budget. And looking ahead till November, I do want to call the board's attention to the fact that toward the mid to end of November will be the opening of the Near Health Clinic. And they're in preparation for that opening. There will be some activities, some tours, some orientations, some visitations, opportunity to visit the facility, to learn about it, and those opportunities will be made available to you and also to employees who take the Eau Claire health insurance program. So there'll be more information coming on those activities for you. And finally tonight, the Eau Claire Area School District will join school districts throughout the state to salute their local education leaders during the Wisconsin School Board Appreciation Week, which is this week, October 5th through 11th. This commemorative week is designed to recognize the contributions made by Wisconsin school board members who are charged with governing public education under state law. Wisconsin school board members are chosen by their communities to oversee the local schools. These volunteer leaders are responsible for formulating school district policy, approving curricula, maintaining school facilities, and adhering to state and federal education law for the school district. our deepest appreciation as a staff, and I think also as a community, is extended to the members of the school board who make it possible for local citizens to participate in our community schools. And we want to salute you this week as our public servants, and thank you for the long hours and the dedication and the work that you put in on behalf of the children of the Eau Claire Area School District. So thank you.
Thank you. It's nice to get a thank you for once for this. Which actually, I get more than you might think, but it's much appreciated. On the President's report, I'd just like to follow up on the legislative breakfast the superintendent mentioned. For board members, if you could let me or President Robert of Altoona, if you're going, it helps them with the count for that. So just let me know if you're going to go. A reminder about the Legislative Advocacy Conference on November 8th in Stevens Point. I'm not sure we have one of our members going, but I hope we can at least get one to go to that. So you can contact Secretary Iverson if you can make that. And I can forward the information if you don't have it. At the regional conference we went to recently, WASB has a school perception survey for school boards that are using KeyWorks. If you could take that, that actually might help us see how well we are using it. So it's a tool that they have available for that. And that's it for my report. Okay. Student representative report, Hannah. So it looks like Jonah's not here, so you're doing it tonight for both. Go ahead.
Flying solo tonight. I just have a few things to report on that North has been doing lately. This week is our homecoming week, so that gets a lot of school spirit going. We have dress-up days every day this week. Today was Superhero Day, so actually it was Marvel Monday, so you're supposed to dress like your favorite Marvel superhero, and it just seems like that throughout the week that get people pumped up for homecoming. There's a parade on Friday. The dance is on Saturday. Again, superhero themed, up and away is actually what they're calling it. So it's pretty cool. Something that hasn't been done at North before. Then tomorrow morning, actually, 5 students from North and 5 students from Memorial are leaving to attend the Nobel Conference at Gustavus Adolphus College in Minnesota. I attended last year. It's a really great experience. You learn a lot about science. Last year's topic was outer space, like what lies beyond, I think it was what it's called. So it was a lot about things that went way over my head, but the things that I did understand were really interesting. And this year is exploring science and all the discoveries that have been made and what they think will come, since it's the 50th anniversary this year. So 10 students from Eau Claire are going to attend that tomorrow and Wednesday. Last week, North volleyball team had a Dig Pink event where they raised money for breast cancer awareness. They do this every year, and it gets a lot of community support. The volleyball team wears Dig Pink t-shirts that have the pink cancer ribbon on them, and then proceeds from the game go to benefit breast cancer. A week and a half ago, the North football team had their second win this season, which is really big since they haven't had a season with 2 wins in a while. Yeah, they were playing Chippewa, and it was a pretty good game to go to. It was exciting. And at that game, Students Against Destructive Decisions, which is a club that I'm involved in, had an activism that presented T-shirts against the fence that represented teen deaths and what their causes were and what to be cautious for. Black was for motor vehicle incidents, which was by far the highest. I think we had 15 black T-shirts. And then there were also T-shirts for drug and alcohol use that caused death, suicide, and then others. So just random causes. Oh, and violence was another one of them. So that really raised awareness about what to be cautious of and what to focus on this year as our SAD group. And last but not least, Sunday, so yesterday, was North's first Powder Puff game in a really long time. It had a kind of surprising outcome. The sophomores were actually the grand champions. Seniors got third.
Can you explain what that is exactly?
Oh, Powder Puff football is where the girls...
Football that you say.
Yeah, the girls play flag football, and some of the football players are the coaches. It's a nice role reversal.
And they play each other by class, right?
Yes. Everyone can participate, but those who chose not to participate this year were offered the opportunity to be in the pep band, which was kind of cool. It was teachers and students there that were in the pep band, which was interesting. So yeah, that's all I have to report on.
Fantastic. Exciting week this week at North.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. I'd like to hear more about your club over time. That's interesting. Policy and governance, you met today. I don't know who's doing the report today.
I'll just
Commissioner
say
Duex?
that
Okay.
we spent most of our time with Mr. Vanderwater talking about fund balance, and we spent about an hour on that, I think. And we had a couple others that we discussed briefly, but that was the main agenda today.
Great, thank you. Did budget meet today? No. Okay, so no meeting since the last time. Okay, all right. Oh, of course, right, thank you. Legislative update, Commissioner Hamburg-Boyle.
Yep, here goes. I pulled the WASB legislative update off the internet, and we'll just highlight a couple of the things that they put on their website on October 3rd. And you can always go to their website, wasb.org, and you can get into it more specifically than what I will share with you this evening. The first piece of the update talks about the recent Marquette University Law School poll that puts Governor Walker leads Mary Burke in that poll. Retiring Representative Castell he's a Republican from Elkhart Lake. He was the head of the GOP State Assembly Education Committee chair and had done a lot of different meetings around the state. He is retiring, but in his exit interview, which was highlighted in our legislative update, said that expanding school choice could exacerbate already declining enrollment in rural schools. And with the state funding schools on a per pupil basis, the former Howard Grove School Board president said he fears there's no plan on how to handle that funding squeeze. So I thought it was important for me to highlight that part. He said that rural schools' problem will be on steroids with the wide open school choice program cutting across the state, and no one has even tried to explain how we're going to deal with that as a state. No one has tried to explain how we're going to fund parallel school programs, because that's where we're headed. So he was the Republican in charge of that committee making that statement. There's also a pro-voucher study that's been put on the website in the last round of the legislative update. It was released Tuesday by the Chicago-based Friedman Foundation for Educational Choice. They did talk about the cost savings, publicly funded vouchers to offset tuition, and that there was 10 cities have saved a total of $1.7 billion. But when you get to the end of the legislative report, the person who worked in that study gave this quote. He said, "One common complicating factor is student eligibility. If a voucher program allows students already enrolled in a private school to qualify, then those students do not directly receive the public school system of any cost. Thus, there is a new public cost incurred for the vouchers provided to those students, but no corresponding savings for the public school system. Anytime voucher eligibility extends to students not currently enrolled in a public school, the net saving calculation must include that complicating factor." So it's more complicated than it appears, and people need to realize that. And the other thing they just talked about was that DPI is partnering with CISAs to gather needed broadband data for schools so that we can use that data in providing service.
Great, thank you. Always a lot going statewide, it seems like. Okay, so next is our consent agenda. For the consent agenda, it's items that the board has considered before or has received background material on it. These will be acted on with one vote without discussion, but if a board member wishes to discuss any item, they may ask to pull it from the consent agenda. So I would entertain a motion to approve the minutes of September 22nd, 2014. A motion to approve the minutes of the closed session September 22nd, 2014. A motion to approve the Human Resources Employment Report, and a motion to approve the revisions to policy 655.1, activity passes. Do I have,
So moved.
we have a motion from Commissioner Johnson.
Second.
We have a second from Commissioner Duax. Is there any discussion on the consent agenda? Let's see. Yes, we can do this by voice vote. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay, so now, individually considered resolutions. We have the recommended budget. I think I would just hand it over to Mr. Vandewater, but while he's getting set up, today before us is to approve the budget for 2014-15, and the next step, assuming it is approved tonight, is for public hearing and a special meeting to adopt it. Board members have asked some questions since the last meeting, and Dan will relate those questions and some of the responses to those questions so that the public is aware of the kind of questions we've answered and the answers to those. You ready, Dan?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you.
Patty will be assisting me with some of the documentation that is involved in answering the questions. Let's take questions from Commissioner Vu first. Question 1. Where does the money collected from athletic passes, high school games go, and what are the funds used for? The answer, money collected from athletic passes and ticket sales offset the cost of activities. The monies are deposited in the general fund bank account. Attached is a report that shows collections by activity for the last 3 years. And this is the report that refers to. You can see I put in the names of the activities, but we have co-curricular admissions for Memorial and for North. And for 2011-12, they added up to about 149,000, 134,000 for 12-13. This year that just ended, 148,000. And next year's budget is approximately the same as at 153,000. So that is question number 1. Moving on to question number 2.
And I would say if any board members have a question about the response, you are welcome to signal me to ask.
Certainly. Question number 2. I heard that the maintenance staff's base salary is the same as teachers because they chose to take more in salaries in lieu of less benefits. I would like to see a comparison chart of fringe benefit differences for maintenance staff and other staff who opted to keep more benefits. So we shared this this table in response to the question. The first schedule, which we're looking at here, is a history of internal negotiated settlements going back to the 2002-2003 school year. Some data is not available from earlier years for some of the groups. By 2007-2008, which is right here, a consistent costing methodology was in place, and it was possible to report wage, benefit, and total package percentages. The table shows that in 2009-10, for example, and that would be this year right here, right, more emphasis was placed on benefits in the ECAE and non-union settlements than on salary in the classified food service and custodial settlements. For each bargain, employee groups came to the table with their own unique objectives. Prior to Act 10, the district's focus was on the total package. Since Act 10, the focus has been on base wage. The main point is that over time, negotiations have caused salary schedules to be what they are today. So, you can take a look at the various years and where the emphasis on the various groups were. So, that is that table. Any questions on that response? Okay, then moving on to the next table. I have a couple of tables here in response to the question. The second schedule is a copy of the 2013-2014 certified staff salary schedule. It is a traditional salary schedule with steps and lanes. Steps going down the left-hand side, and lanes going across the top. The salary schedule ranges from $38,079 for a beginning teacher with no experience to, if you look down at the lower right-hand corner, $63,473 for a veteran teacher with 32 credits beyond the master's degree. A teacher is contracted for 8 hours a day for 189 days. 3 paid holidays are included in the 189 days. Total hours per year are 1,512. Teachers also receive additional pay for time worked beyond the normal workday. In most instances, the rate of pay for the additional time is $24 per hour. Sometimes the individual's daily rate is used. As exempt employees under the Fair Labor Standards Act, teachers are not eligible for overtime. Step movement did not happen in 2012 and 12-13 and in 2013-14. Step movement being moving down the schedule. The third schedule is a copy of the 2013-14 Buildings and Grounds salary schedule. It's a 5-step salary schedule, as you can see here, step A, B, C, D, and E. New staff are usually placed on step A and move forward 1 step each year until they reach the top. At the step movement did not occur in 2013-2014. The fourth schedule. Thank you, Patty. Scroll up just a little more. There you go. I don't know if we can get this all on the screen, but the fourth schedule that we provided converts custodial hourly rates of pay to annual salaries. Custodians are contracted for 2,080 hours per year. They receive overtime when they work more than 40 hours per week. Salaries range from $39,062 for an entry-level custodian, which would be right there, to annual salary of $43,098 for an elementary lead custodian. There are, on this report, 63 custodians in the Buildings and Grounds Department. There are other employees in the Buildings and Grounds Department. This report just carves out the number of custodians, because that was the nature of the question. And then one final note, beginning with the 2013-14 school year, all employees who qualify for health and dental insurance receive the same board contribution towards their premiums. Board contributions for 2014-15 for all employees are dental single coverage, $517.92, which is 83% of the premium. For family dental coverage, $1,294.80, again 83% of the premium. For health single coverage, $6,381, 87.4% of the premium. For limited family coverage, $13,336.20, 87.4% of the premium. And health family coverage, $16,526.64, which again is 87.4% of the premium. So those were the questions and the corresponding answers.
Okay. Were there other questions? Did that cover everyone's questions that they had submitted? Other questions about the budget from the board? This is their annual budget.
Well, we have questions from President Spindler.
Yeah.
that we can go over too.
Yeah. I just wanted to point out, I had asked the question, what about our net position, if you remember that? And it was a negative net position. And the main reason for me asking that question about why it's negative is to think about our long-term health, which is what, a balance sheet and a net position should look at. And that was my question. So I don't know if you want to address that at all.
Yeah,
go ahead.
I'd like to read
you could
your
just describe
and provide the answers.
Yeah, that would be great. Thank you.
Okay. Patty, if you want to go to the... Okay. President Spindler had the following questions. Question number 1 was, in the budget book, Capital Projects Fund Expenditure Summary, I noticed there was a significant difference in what the 2014 budget was versus the actual, with the actual less, which is good. Is that just because of timing of how the DeLong project finished or something else? And you can see, we can't get it all on the same page, but we've got this past year's budget was $9,275,431. We ended up spending $2,266,757, and your supposition was correct. We budget what we think we're going to accomplish during the construction, but the actual represents what we actually paid out for the construction. And we know that DeLong is a multi-year project, so at the end of the day, the important thing is that the total amount of money that's borrowed isn't exceeded.
Exactly.
And we're headed in that direction.
I thought it was good news to illustrate.
Right. So we'll, somewhere in the not too distant future, when all the projects are tied out, all the walkthroughs and the details have been taken care of, we'll be reporting to the board the outcome, the fiscal outcome of the projects that were involved in that borrowing. Okay. Question number 2. I noticed in the budget book statement of net position, the total net position is about a negative 9.3 million. Is that negative primarily a reflection of our OPEB liabilities? Will this level of negative net position continue for a while, and are there consequences to this, and what are they? President Spindler is referring to the financial statements at the back of the budget document. I was happy to see that someone was actually looking at them. They tend to be a little dry. Yeah, but if you could scroll down a little bit, Patty. This is the table that is being referred to, and what it is it's kind of like a balance sheet where you have your assets minus your liabilities gives you your, what in this case is referred to as a net position. And it takes into consideration more than what's happening in your operational budget. And you can see that the two key ingredients here are your capital assets net of depreciation. That's essentially the depreciated value of your sites and your facilities today, your buildings. And the big ticket item in your liabilities is the 163,786. And how that breaks down is what you were supposing. In that liability amount, there's 85,563,738 for the OPEB liability. That is the health and dental till age 65. The stipend, the supplemental pension, as it's technically referred to, is 22,688,808, and then also included that is the long-term principal outstanding for your long-term borrowing. That's there, which is a little over 55.5 million. So that adds up to that 163 million. So you can see that a negative 9.3 million could be taken care of by either bringing more assets online, although that's probably not likely. You're not looking at building new buildings and having more of an asset value in the district, at least at this current point in time, or reducing your liabilities. And you've been considering what to do with OPEB, and we'll continue to consider that in the context of that compensation study, I believe has been your desire. So really the negative 9.3 million, while it sounds like a lot of money in isolation, when you're looking at these kinds of volumes of assets and liabilities, it's not an amount that creates concern for the people who are interested in loaning money to the district when you go out for long-term debt. The district has a AA Standard & Poor's rating of AA stable, which is very high rating. They regard the district as a very stable financial risk. And so, if this were to start going negative in a major way, well, yes, then that would be a concern. But for right now, your financial institutions interested in you don't see that as a negative. So that would be that question. And then the third question was, I noticed that the elementary and total classified aid staff count dropped a fair amount. Does that indicate a significant shift in needs in some way? And the answer to that question is no. The number of elementary general school assistants is formula driven. And the formula calls for, well, I can explain it up here better than reading the estimation. Flynn, for example, and this is the allocation for 14-15 that we're looking at. How many sections do you have in kindergarten? You take the number of sections times 2 hours per day, and that gives you 6 hours worth of general aid time. Add to that the 13 hours of the number of sections that you have in grades 1 through 5. Multiply that times 1 hour a day. Add 2 hours of time, GSA time for library. Everybody has a media center, so you see it's 2 across the board. And then it's not news so much anymore. New and hour supervision is also then factored into this. And you can see that that varies by school depending on the size of the playground, the configuration of the playground, and the amount of supervision necessary to keep it safe. So if you add up those, you come up with 24 hours a day of aid time. For Flynn, collectively it's 315 hours. Divide that by 8 and you come up with a full-time equivalency. So every year is a little different. Some, the numbers of sections change from year to year, depending on how buildings are configured. That's what drives the FTE count. And so those are the questions that were asked and the answers that we provided.
Okay, great. Thank you, Dan. Any other questions from board members? Commissioner Johnson, I was hoping to call the question here. Well, I guess, well, yes, except Commissioner Johnson is gone, debating whether to wait for her to come back to make the vote. But why don't we go ahead if you're willing to call the question.
Call the question.
Okay, let's call the question. So could we do a roll call vote, please? Oh, I'm sorry. Excuse me. We don't have a... okay, so I would entertain a motion to approve the budget.
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
Okay. Now we can call the question. Go ahead. Roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Cummins?
Yes.
Commissioner Humbug-Boyle?
Yes.
Commissioner Duax?
Yes.
Commissioner Vu?
Yes.
Commissioner Jean?
Yes.
Commissioner Spindler?
Yes.
And Commissioner Johnson is not present. Yes. Oh, yes. Got it.
Thank you for the reminder of having a motion. Okay. I'm tired tonight. All right. So now we will adjourn to committee, and we have an opening of school report. Go ahead, Superintendent Hardwick.
So tonight we have a number of representatives from DLT who will be reporting to you on an opening of schools report. I believe this may be the first time that you have had such a report on the opening of schools. And so I'd like to just go over just a bit of the format for this, because we want to talk about factors that are related not only to who we are starting up as a new school year with students and staff, but also to what the demographics say about our students. We'd like to talk with you a little bit about the programs that we offer, such as special ed, gifted and talented, bilingual education, and talk about the students that are in those programs. We want to give you an update of where we are on national and state student achievement indicators, our participation rates and in activities, and also the levels of engagement that we're seeing from our various groups. And then finally end up by reporting to you a little bit on teacher quality in terms of experience levels within the district, mobility, certification, and also the demographics of that group as well. We want you to know who is leading and who is teaching in our buildings and with our students. And I think that you'll see as we go through this report, there will be a number of factors that are related to equity that will come up, as well as how we're performing. So, you know, one of the goals I think for the district has been for the last several years is to try to eliminate educational barriers that are based on gender, race, ethnicity, national origin, color, disability, age, or other protected group status. And to determine through a review of these programs whether or not we're providing equal educational opportunities to ensure that historically underserved or underrepresented populations meet the same rigorous standards of academic performance expected of all children. So what we're hoping to do tonight is to give you more or less a baseline report and see what other information you will want us to pursue, and then as we move forward from year to year, we'll be referring back to this. But most of the information we're presenting to you tonight is anywhere from a 3 to 5 year trend of what we're seeing. So Mr. Liven's going to lead off tonight, and he's going to talk a little bit about our student demographics.
Thank you. The first part is some things you've seen already as we've talked about our ever since the demographic trends and facilities planning committee started meeting, giving you update on where we are with enrollments, and that's how we're going to begin, I believe, this evening. I'm left clicking. There you go. Is that me? Okay. When we talk about our overall enrollments, this is based on the third Friday count in February. That was our first count of students. The official count will go to DPI this Wednesday. But at that point, the third Friday count in September, we had 11,146 students enrolled in our school district. Keep in mind those numbers fluctuate daily. In the last 2.5 weeks, those numbers have actually peaked up a little bit, closer to 11,160. But we needed to use a baseline at some point, so we did use what the actual count was in September. When we used the 2010 census data, the APL projection was anywhere between 11,060 and 11,182. So you can see, based on those projections, we are right in the ballpark. One thing I would recommend to the demographics committee this year: these projections are now close to 5 years old. Probably time to have the APL, the Applied Population Laboratory, do another study. I know the city and county are also working on a new study as well. Okay. Then if we looked at levels, you can see in pre-K, 4K, the APL had projected 799 children enrolled in the program. We have 877. That's based on 87.5% of eligible 4-year-olds actually enrolled in a program. We don't know exactly what that percentage is, but we know that beginning about 15 years ago, what had been projected to be families enrolling their 4-year-olds and 3-year-olds into our program, we've exceeded that every year for the last 10, 12 years. And this trend continues. When we look at K-5, you can see our enrollments actually are a bit lower than what had been projected. 6-8 is just about at the lower level, 2,271 of what had been projected, and our high schools are above what had been projected. So those 4 areas combined is what gave us the 11,146. If we look at just a 5-year trend of our overall enrollments, you can see the 2010-2011 school year down to 2014-15. Currently, our early learning numbers have continued to increase. Our elementary enrollments have continued to increase. Middle school has increased at about the same rate as our elementary school. And our high schools, which we knew had still been in a declining enrollment up until last year where we plateaued, they're starting to see an increase in enrollments this year. What's surprising in this data is that our high schools took a larger jump than what had been projected. We had more 9th through 12th graders enroll over the summer and at the beginning of the school year than we would have had in 8th grade last year, moving in and replacing our outgoing seniors. We don't know why that is, but that has been a bump, and some of the reason is open enrollment that you'll see in a little bit. When we look at district meal assistance, those families who qualify and file for free and reduced meals, over the last 10 years we've moved as a district 31% to 42%. These numbers represent those students who are in our district. Sometimes when you look at title funding at the elementary level or the middle school, it's the children who qualify for free and reduced in a neighborhood or in an area. These numbers just reflect those who are in our schools on a yearly basis. So we've gone up over the last 10 years by 11%. I showed you this last year. This is our current free and reduced rates meal assistance at the elementary level. On the left-hand column is from highest density to lowest density by percentage. And on the right would be the numerical or the enrollment of students in, again, by most to least. One little interesting tidbit here is when you look at Manns, has a 50% free and reduced rate, but Manns is not a SAGE school, where Sherman, with 45% free and reduced rate, is a SAGE school. If you recall, several years ago, SAGE contract was maintained by placing the contract at Sherman because space was available, not necessarily because there was a greater student need relative to another building. So those are some of the little anomalies that we hear about. The other thing that we think we should point out, and last year, because of this chart and looking at the data and working with Mr. Teal at Robbins and his staff and Sue Brown in Food and Nutrition, when we looked at Robbins and people thought, well, Robbins has only a 34 or a relatively low percentage of students who qualify and have filed for free and reduced. Yet when you look at their number, 175, it's in the middle of the pack. They began their breakfast program at Robbins last year to meet the needs of the students. So again, sometimes when we look at percentages, it can be misleading given a school with a larger enrollment, but a lower percentage still has quite a few students and families in need. Then we broke it down by the middle schools, same chart, just obviously fewer schools. You see DeLong, North Star, and South in ranking order, and the same in terms of numeric or enrollment numbers. And then at the high school, the same. This is a slide that came from the Department of Public Instruction, and what you see on the left-hand side, the line in the middle would be the, not the dotted line, but the one right above that. That's 50% of students in a school qualifying for free and reduced meals. The dotted line is where the Eau Claire School District is located. The black curvy line on the left would show high poverty, low performing schools. So these are schools that are above the 75% free and reduced rate, or if you looked at the entire area, above the 40% free and reduced rate. On the right-hand side, those are higher income, high-performing schools, and again, you can see the scatter of schools that qualify there. It's important, we think, to point out that we have two schools that are at 77 and 66% free and reduced, and yet who are meeting expectations, which is the middle column. And all of our schools above, at the 42% line are at or exceeds performance standards. So although we have a relatively high percentage of students and families who are on meal assistance and qualify for free and reduced meals, our students are performing above what the state average would be overall as a district. And we think that's something to be very proud of and recognize our staff is in fact taking that into account as we look to figure out better ways and more effective ways of educating our children. Then when we look at school capacity, and we talk about capacity in many different ways, we thought we would just share with you a simple overview of what classroom needs are from a general educational standpoint. These classrooms do not take into account special education or specialized programming that we cluster in some of our schools or that are included in all of our schools. These are your general ed mainstream classrooms. So you have in K3, several years ago, the board adopted a targeted class size that had 25 students per classroom as a targeted max range for grades K3. And in SAGE, by state law, that has to be 18 students per classroom or 30 students with 2 teachers. In 4-5, regardless if you're a SAGE school or not, the targeted class range at the max level would be 29 in a class. Keep in mind those are targets and suggestions, not absolutes, whereas SAGE is an absolute number based on the third Friday count. At the elementary school, we have 3 two-section schools, Locust Lane, Flynn, and Roosevelt, meaning that there are 2 sections. The school was built and designed for 2 sections of kindergarten through 2 sections of 5th grade, or 12 regular ed classrooms. If we took the 25 max, that would be 316 students, ideally in that school if it were non-SAGE, and 260 students if it were a SAGE school. We have 6 three-section schools, and you see them listed there. And again, applying the same mathematical simple formula, 18 regular ed classrooms are in those schools. For non-SAGE schools, if those students at the max targeted class range were evenly distributed throughout those classrooms, it would handle 474 students, or 390 if it were a SAGE school. And then recently, under the last referendum, we expanded both Sherman and Robbins to be 4-section schools to address the expanding growth in those areas. And again, you can see what the enrollment capacities would be for those 2 based on 24 regular ed classrooms. So let's see how we're currently doing this year. In the 2-section school, you can see what our current enrollment is. I identified the school, whether it was SAGE or non-SAGE, and what the max population would be, and then whether those schools were over their enrollment capacity or under their enrollment capacity. So Flynn has 297 students. It's a SAGE school at the max level. Ideally, it would have 260 students. There are 37 students over the max. How Flynn addresses that is by having 30 students in one classroom with 2 teachers to reduce the number of classrooms that are needed. Locust Lane has room for growth, and Roosevelt, you can see, is under by 14 students. You can see that as we go down the road. Lakeshore has been talked about now for a number of years of being overly crowded. Lakeshore, given that it's a SAGE school, has 46 students beyond what it's capable of handling as a SAGE school. As a non-SAGE school, it is actually undersubscribed and would have additional space for children, given our formula. And you can see what those schools are. Longfellow continues to be a school that has significant space, given its neighborhood, as does Robbins. But again, Robbins was built and expanded upon based on increasing enrollments. Another interesting thing with the 4-section schools is when you look at Sherman, both those schools were designed to handle increasing enrollments, one on the west side, one on the southeast side. But with Sherman being a SAGE school, it reduces the capacity by 112 students, thereby increasing possible crowding issues prematurely from what had been planned during the referendum. We're looking at, and I know the Policy and Governance Committee would like to rethink the alternate school requests. I thought it would be interesting to share, we thought it would be interesting to simply share how many alternate school requests are in and out since we've been adhering more to the current board policy. Keep in mind that some of these numbers are a bit inflated based on maintaining family connectivity in a school. So we have some students who had been grandfathered to stay in the school, and if they have a sibling who's going to be starting elementary school, those children were able and families were able to maintain enrollment as one family in a school. But there you can see in terms of active students who are attending a school, like in Davie, there are 23 students attending Sam Davie Elementary School who do not live in that neighborhood. And there are 7 students who live in the Sam Davy attendance area who are attending a different school. And you can see what those enrollments are for a total of 146 families, or approximately 3.5% of our elementary enrollment. At the middle school, same issue, 113 overall children are attending a school outside of their resident neighborhood. That's about 5% of the overall enrollment. And then when you get to the high school, again, it drops down to about 3.2 or 3.3% of the overall high school enrollment. Then we looked at Chippewa Valley Montessori, and we looked at, since that is a district-wide school, where are the students, what resident neighborhoods, what elementary schools would these children be attending had it not been for Montessori, and you can see what those numbers are. That's for 4K through 5th grade. Then when we looked at open enrollments also, this is simply a comparison. On the bottom, you see the 2013-14 school year. These are 442 students had left the Eau Claire School District to attend school elsewhere. 257 enrolled in. This year, the trend is about the same, or the difference, with 461 students leaving the district, 275 coming into the district. A little caveat with this, several years ago, I talked to other larger school districts our size throughout the state. They experience similar trends with more students leaving larger districts than enrolling in. So this is not unique to Eau Claire. The other thing that Commissioner Humbach-Boyle had mentioned about this ongoing year-round, wide-open school choice or alternate school enrollment, we have in the state of Wisconsin, for all intents and purposes, year-round open enrollment. We have students requesting to come in and to leave on a weekly, if not on a daily basis. And for all sorts of reasons, and the state has put structures in place where a family can request to enter or leave a district for really any reason. So it's a very difficult process to monitor because at times, once the year begins, choices are being made not necessarily for sound educational reasons. But that's where we are with our current open enrollment. With that, to start to look at who these children are, Robin.
Good evening. I'd like to just paint a picture of some more specificity to our groups of kids from the data that Tim gave. As you can see on this chart, of our 11,146 kids, we have approximately 6,465 who are not on free and reduced, and that represents the 58% that are not. We have 4,681 that are. Our gifted and talented students. We have 2,462 gifted and talented students in our district, which represents 22% of our population, and I'll talk more about some more specificity of that group in a minute. We have 1,438 special ed students in our district. That represents almost 13% of our students, which is a typical percentage for Eau Claire, below the state average. Critical health needs. We have 1,271 students in our school district that have critical health needs, which represents about 11% of our students. Students then have intense critical health needs that require an individual health plan. We have 542, which represents 5% of our population. Again, that's typical from the last couple of years. Our English language learners, we have 277, which represents 2% of our population. I'll talk about them in more detail in a minute. And we also have 125 students at the moment who are considered homeless. And I'd like to share with you that last year in November we had 90 students compared to the 125 now that were considered homeless. And at the end of last school year we had 215. So taking a look at 125 students right now is something for us to be concerned about. Here are the percentages of our district enrollment by race. which has been consistent the last several years. Next is our Hispanic Latino population. Gender. And here's our gifted and talented students. Remember, 22% or 2,462 students are gifted and talented. And of those gifted and talented students, some more specificity of who
Robin,
they are.
could a board member ask a question? Would that be okay?
You answered it.
Okay. Okay. If you take a look at race, you can see that 86% of our gifted and talented students are white. Then you can see the other breakdowns. Of our gifted and talented students, 77% are not free and reduced, 23% are. And also wanted to share with you that of our gifted and talented population, those that are GT and English learners, 1% of that population, and also 3% of the GT students are also special ed. And I think that's important for people to realize. And then here's our special education population, about 13%. And here's the breakdown as of our third Friday count of each of the disability areas and the number of students in each of those categories as their primary disability. And then breaking down the special education students into race, 82% are white, and then you can see our others. 64% of our students who are in special education receive free and reduced lunch. 36% do not. And then if I start with the special education population, combine that, cross-reference that with our GT students, there's 5%, and special ed and EL 3%. Just looking at a different base. And then these are English learners. The limited English proficiency is a term used by DPI. We use English learners with 2% of our population. And broken down by race. Did we lose it? We must have lost it. Yeah. Oh, you do? Okay. All right. So 77% of our English learners are Asian. I will go backwards. 77% are Asian, 2% Black or African American, 1% are American Indian or Alaskan Native, 1% are Native Hawaiian or other Pacific Islander, and 0% are 2 or more races. Then if you look at all the free and reduced for our English learners, 93% are free and reduced, and 7% are not. All right. That's representation of our students. Any questions on that part? If not, I will turn it over to Jim to talk more about the achievement and participation of all of our students.
I'm sorry. So it's not so much a question as a comment, and I'm glad you put that data in there, but that flip almost of our special ed and GT with our free and reduced, non-free and reduced. How we might get some more information on that and how people are, I mean,
What kind of information are you
I don't know
looking
what
for?
questions to ask for, except that I think as a board we should find that alarming. So, but I don't know the right questions to ask.
Okay. All right. We'll look into that. Gather more.
I want to comment on the comment. I think as a society, we should find it alarming. I don't think it's, as a board, we should necessarily be surprised, because research tells us that, poverty affects the opportunities that kids have. And if they're not coming, they may be gifted but not identified because they've got these other barriers to overcome, and then not having proper nutrition and a stressful home environment that comes with poverty affects the way kids' brains develop. And so for them to come and have special learning needs, whether it's emotional or whatever it might be, as a society, we need to figure that out. And then as a school, what maybe I think the question maybe we would want to ask the school is, what are we doing to overcome those barriers that kids come with in order to help them reach their full potential, and what kinds of steps we've taken to, to really pursue getting, all kids the opportunities that they need.
And just as a kind of a follow-up to that, one of the reasons that we showed you the graph about poverty making a difference in terms of student achievement is that when you look across the state, you see the schools that have the most poverty have the lowest achievement rates. And, I think when we look at where our poverty rate falls and where our free and reduced lunch rate or meal assistance, however you choose to refer to it, we see that overall our schools are making progress. But it's pinpointing and putting a face on the students who are not succeeding, which is what we've asked schools to do in their school improvement plans, to have identification of individual needs as you've asked for in your school board goals, and also to come up with targeted interventions for those students. I just had a conversation with a couple of principals who were talking about, well, we invite people to come for these interventions, and we're kind of more moving toward the idea of we're going to do less inviting and more requiring. I think that's where the real intervention comes in, is they're not optional interventions.
And I think my concern, which, yes, it's a bigger picture, lots of factors, but we are identifying almost 25,000 kids as GT. And so we do have an active role in making sure we're identifying beyond social capital is my concern. But where we can't fix everything, I would like to hear some specifics about how we are going in and identifying, and maybe it's the whole idea of having high expectations for every kid. But 25,000 kids we've identified as 2,500 as gifted and talented, which, and I get that we're doing it in lots of different areas, but there's still some concerns about how students are identified, and once you get identified, what that means for you from then on. So those are where my concerns are, specifically what we can do to make sure we're not missing out on kids.
Hello.
Go ahead, Jim.
All right. As Robin said, I'm going to...
Excuse me, Catherine had a question. I didn't see that.
Well, in the past, haven't we identified students as gifted and talented? They were identified by their teachers. Isn't that true?
And we can get some information for you about how those identifications are made specifically. But there are a number of factors that go into the identification and access to those programs. And, I think Commissioner Cummings is, on target when she says we need to carefully monitor those programs to make sure that we're reaching, all the students that would meet that criteria, but also are we putting out criteria that is not necessarily an identifying factor. So I think it's kind of a two-way street there.
I agree.
Okay, go ahead, Jim.
All right. As Robin Kriego said, I will be picking up on the achievement data and some of this data you've seen before, and also the some perception data before we get into the staff part that Kay will present. So this is the district report card, and each school, of course, received a report card. They were released on September 16th. Our district can happily share that in all schools and the district, we either meet or exceed expectations. Last year, we had 5 schools exceeding expectations, and now we're up to 9. So we've had that increase. And we've seen, we track the data for each of these 4 areas because we have the student achievement on the right side, student growth, closing gaps, and on track for post-secondary readiness. And we've been very strong in all areas. And if you look at a bit of a heat map that we do of these areas for each of our buildings, we have a lot of consistencies. But we do have an area actually that has caught our attention. It's actually the on-track and post-secondary readiness. That piece, as you'll notice, is above state average, and it's actually the smallest above state average, and it's an area where we didn't grow as much as we had in other areas overall as a district. So we're going to speak to that a little bit because the on-track to post-secondary readiness, if you look at the categories there, it gets into graduation rate and attendance rate, and both of those have been pretty solid. Our graduation rate is just a hair behind the state on the 4-year rate, but our 6-year rate is far above the state's. But the third grade reading is an area, and ACT performance in those, you'll hear this theme of reading come up as we share some data in a few moments. The other from this is some success stories, as you know, because of those, one of those 5 buildings that went to exceeds, of course, was Lakeshore, which started from meets few, and then last year became meets expectations, and then finally this year is at exceeds. So they've gone, if you look at the color scale on the left side, from that yellow to the second to top green. So you do have a nice little success story in there. That's a school that's rapidly improved throughout the past 3 years. So we want to dig a little bit. This is a 5-year trend of, this is looking at, the WSAS is the Wisconsin Knowledge and Concepts Exam and the Wisconsin Alternative Assessment for Students with Disabilities. And so together they combine the WSAS, Wisconsin Student Assessment System. And the system, if you recall, was rescaled about 2.5 years ago to recalibrate to the National Assessment for Education Progress. And so the numbers you're seeing across here are all on the same scale. It's all apples to apples scoring. And so you can see the district, which is the blue one, we've outscored the state in reading as an aggregate consistently. And you'll notice that this graph in general does a little bit of oscillating, but kind of hovers right around that 40%. That green line up above is an internal number that we've been working on and having discussions. Dr. Hardebeck has spoken frequently about Agenda 2017. We kind of sort of have this Agenda 2020, this goal that by 2020 we can get to 80%. And so one of the issues that we're looking at right now is the fact that we aren't deflecting our performance upward probably to quickly enough to reach that goal. If we flip to the next slide, this looks at just third grade. So why just third grade? Because third grade is on that post-secondary readiness indicator of the state report card. It's one of the key indicators for student progress in our system. And you'll notice the third grade data, for the district is above the state, but you'll notice that in the last year we've actually ticked a little bit downward, 1% from 1% usually doesn't grab our attention significantly. Usually you get towards 3%, but we're seeing that oscillation. Again, we're not seeing a deflection upward. We're pretty steady in terms of our data. Not a steadiness that gets you too excited, actually, because you want to see that going upward. The math trend, this is that other piece, and we're going to get to 8th grade math in just a moment, but this is the math data. The math data actually does provide us a little bit of excitement. If you look at that, I remember by using that 3% guide, we've actually did see this past year for the entire district, over a 3% growth. That's pretty significant. Very interesting. You'd always like, yay, but we'll wait to see if that continues. But we were really oscillating around that 50% area and then suddenly saw an uptick. Not sure if that's a one-year aberration or if that's a beginning of a trend, but we're keeping our eyes on that one. And likewise, if we focus just on 8th grade, again, even though this was just under that 3% threshold, which gets us excited, it's pretty darn close. You can see we're really oscillating around that 48, 49%, and then suddenly the last 3 years from that low of 48.6%, we've seen a pretty steady increase. Those are very positives. Those are very positive outcomes.
Hey, Jim, any ideas on what's that correlating with in terms of programs or activities?
Actually, there's some of the new math programs are coming in now, but we're not, you wouldn't see that data reflected here yet. Yeah, but just because of the lag. Because again, this data was collected, what year am I in, 2014? So we go back, this was October 2013 assessment data, which really reflected the year prior. So this is the downfall of the data set and this is, of course, for math and English language arts is expiring now when we're going to be assessing starting this spring. So you'll be able to see the data at the end of the academic year instead of waiting for that summer lag. This is the ACT composite, and this actually, we threw in the national as well, and you notice the national data, if you just focus on the far right line of the three, really hangs right around that 21.0. The ACT is on a scale of up to 36. It is very difficult at the national level to deflect that data more than 0.1%. And you can see that it really holds tight right around 0.1%. There was one year that there was a 0.2 change, but in general, it holds pretty tight, as does the state. The state is around 22. And of course, the state this year, the district last year did the ACT for all students. It's not reflected in this data. This is for graduating seniors. The students that took it this past spring, their data will be reflected in the next round, because when they are graduating seniors, it will show their most recent effort at the ACT. Oh, had to keep back up just a little bit. And so you'll see our data on here oscillates again for the district, and you'll see it was right around that 23, went up, and we're seeing a slight decline over the past 3 years. And we're going to show you in the next slide we think might be part of the cause of that, and that's the ACT reading score. These are the number of students that are meeting the proficiency standards set by ACT for reading. So we just talked about third grade seeing a little bit of a decline or levelness. We're seeing, even with the ACT reading, even a bit more pronounced decline. The caution here is this is not all students. This is a little over 50% of our students in the district. Next year it'll be, like I said, a much different indicator, because we will have all students in there. But we are noticing, again, reading has caught our attention again with this group, so at both ends of the spectrum. We also have some advanced placement course data, and I know both of the high school principals are here, and I will just say that they've worked really hard on this data, and this is pretty exciting data to look at. Actually, it starts out, the graph, there's lots of lines there, but you have to pick a color and follow a color. So if you look at the blue line is how many kids initially enrolled in an advanced placement course. We are trying at the high school great efforts to get more and more kids, to remove barriers for all students to become part of the advanced placement program. We worked with a consultant to really work with our teachers, and some people would say, like, why the big push for AP? And one of the best arguments I've ever heard is, do you want your child's first experience in a college course to be an introductory class with well over 100 people, away from home, with a professor that likely doesn't know your name? Or would you like that experience to be in a class of about 25 kids or so, give or take, in an environment where they do know your name, where you're close to home, and then you can slowly matriculate to that experience where you're on your own in that larger environment? And so this is really the idea of trying to get more of our students to have that advanced placement course experience prior to departure, to improve the probability of success when they are on their own. And if we look at, the first thing is to get them in the door. The second thing is to get them to finish. That's the red line. Each of these graphs, you'll notice from the far left, goes back to 05, 06, you'll notice that they actually trend the wrong direction. And then in 07, 08, they start to climb. And this climb is pretty consistent and steady. So we're seeing more kids with the blue line enroll. We're seeing more kids finish. The green bar is the number of students that take the exam. And that's a big, big step for a student. It's one thing to take the course. It's a very different thing to sit down on this timed exam. It's nationally scored. It's a pretty intense experience. And so we're seeing those numbers increase. And finally, the purple numbers are the numbers of students that are actually passing exams. So the data continue to improve, but I will speak on behalf of the two high school principals. They're working very hard to make those, to even increase the rate of this climb, and working on strategies that will work for all kids, and both to get them in the classroom and to get them to succeed there.
Jim, are those individual students or individual classes?
These are, that's a great point. So for example, my own daughter in 2013-14 actually took 2 courses, so she actually appears here twice. So every time that she took a course, finished a course, she actually counts. So the same student can show up more than one time.
Quick question, Jim. For the advanced placement test, do we provide any assistance for fees?
Yeah, there is. For the students on meal assistance, as referred to with Robin earlier, do have, I think, is it fully discounted, or is it, yeah, they have the fee waived. We're getting there. I love it. So this is our enrollment by race. And if we look at this, if you remember, our number of white students, percentage of students in the district was 83%. So our advanced placement is a little bit higher. And I'm not going to show you every different demographic breakdown or pie chart that Robin showed you. I'm going to show you the ones that deflect or differ from from our statistically differ quite a bit from the first set of graphs that you looked at in terms of our enrollment as a whole by the district. So if you look at this, we have about 6% more students in advanced placement that are white as opposed to our general population. And most of that is impacted by, if you look at the count of more than one color, that's a federal definition for race. That for the district is 5%, and in our advanced placement it is 0%. So there are actually a few kids, but it rounds down to 0. So we're seeing that is a little bit more in terms of students that are white. And then in the next one, if you remember the graph that actually caught my attention when I was first looking at some of these was that first one when 52% of our students are male. Now that's different than, it's not 50-50. However, if you look at remember our percentage of females is 48%, but our enrollment in advanced placement is actually significantly higher by female. And then in the next one, you'll notice, remember our percentage of special ed students is 13% for the district, but it's only 1% in our advanced placement. Keep in mind the special ed is not just always like a reading disability or math disability. There's a variety of different disabilities. Could be hard of hearing or something, or one of those other categories. So it's not, you might expect that to be lower, but this one is significantly lower. So these have gotten our attention as we look at different populations that are not accessing our advanced placement program. Gifted and talented, if you remember, that was 22% were identified gifted and talented in the district, but if you look at those, if we take the students enrolling for advanced placement, it's up to 53% of that population is considered gifted and talented, so it's significantly higher. Which gets back to, I'm sure, some of the questions you talked about earlier, access and being prepared for that program. And then finally, with the way the data come to us from who actually took the exam actually comes to us roundabout. It comes back to us from the College Board. So actually you'll notice that when we look at the number of students, you'll notice that the racial categories are different than the federal categories because those are College Board categories, not federal categories in terms of the definition. So they're and then they report back to us. The N values on the far right kind of give you, if you remember, our economically disadvantaged is generally near 40%, but that group is taking less than 10% of the tests. If we look at our male, if you remember, in female, so the female percentage taking advanced placement is about 58%. It's even a little bit higher in terms of the number of actually taking the exams. And then if we look at our students of color, you'll see the Asian student population, which is around 9% for the district. It's right around there, just a little bit under in terms of the number taking the tests. And then finally, the number of students. The reason why I showed you the data at the bottom is we won't report to you data with groups under 20. And so we just thought you'd be interested to see that we're not getting at least 20 in each of those groups at the bottom. The percent passing rate on there is of interest, but it's more important to get more kids into the exam. You want students to succeed, definitely, but getting them to that exam is the primary piece. The passing rate is something you monitor, but if you can get more kids in, you're going to be, like, for example, the female-male one. Having more students taking it with a little bit lower percentage is generally accepted because you're getting more to have that experience.
Jim, we have a question, I think.
Yep.
So I just don't want to pass this up before we acknowledge it. So the N is
number of students.
74.
74 of the, so if I do my quick math on here, 1,012. Yeah, 74
free and reduced out of a district that's 41% free and reduced. Correct. So can we put that on the list for some additional
and we're showing
information?
this because we are showing this because it did catch our attention.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely. and I know it caught your attention, but I think as a board, there's things that pop up that we need to say. That, how are kids being identified? I know that we have resources in place, but they have to sign up to get the resources.
Absolutely. Part of that post-secondary data for the school report card and the district report card is that attendance rate. This is the goal of 95%, and you can see that barring the very first year when we had this data, 08-09, in the 5-year trend, we've been at or above that. Someone might ask also, why is 2013 14 not on there. We haven't had that data certified yet from the state, so I was just checking this afternoon, it still wasn't there. So we're still waiting for the certification of that data. So, and if I recall for the district though, we won't see much of a difference. I think it's actually about 96% again.
Jim, can I ask one more question?
Absolutely.
Can we get the AP test broken down by North and Memorial?
Yes.
We don't know that off the top of our head though?
No, but we can get that for you.
That'd be great, thank you.
So we're going to switch from academic achievement, and if you remember those 4 domains of student data, we look at programmatic data, demographic data, and of course you've seen a piece of both of those so far, achievement data, and finally the perception data. This is a repeat slide that you saw when we did the student engagement survey, and again it's highlighting the fact that we're going to dig it a little bit deeper today on some of the student data that you haven't seen yet, but recalling that we do for our students, for this particular survey, if you recall, we were well over 90% participation. So this is a really solid data set, and having 85% of our students either be engaged or highly engaged is a pretty significant outcome for our district. The overall family data, if you recall, scoring our district as either an A or a B was at 80%. So 8 out of 10. So we're in both cases at that 80% line that we had talked about earlier. And then on the next slide, looking at that volunteer rate, we're seeing a level of volunteerism pretty significant from, again, those who responded. If you recall, this was a survey responded of 20% of our families. But again, we're seeing a very significant, of this group, 71% have volunteered at least once during the school year. And so if we look at our students, we're going back and forth a little bit between students and parents, but on students, we also dug a little bit deeper, not only just in the engagement and their academic performance, but looking at how engaged they are in the activities of the school. And you're going to see some data in just a moment that is just general, but then we're going to break it down by some demographics as well, which will, I think, provide some interest for you as well. Can you back up just real quick, Patty, one? So again, the first was I participate and I'm interested in participating. The greens being very positive, so you got about 67% on the first one. And the interest, this one always, I always find interesting. You'll see this repeatedly, that the interest is actually less than the participation rate. And then the volunteerism is at about 51%. If we look at our next one, this is the participation rate by grade. The 5th grade is a little bit different in terms of those programs, because you're tending to see some after-school programs that they're very different in nature from middle and high school. But still, those high school numbers are pretty consistent from that 60 to the low 70%. This is, again, is that interest one, again, which is actually lower than the participation. And then this is the volunteerism rate as reported from our students by grade level. We then asked, if you recall back with some of the AP data and other data I shared with you, looking at that male-female piece. So looking at, for the following statements, participation again and interest by gender, and then volunteerism by gender. And then participation by the racial. I gotta look real quick. Yep, we stuck with federal codes on this one. And this is interest by federal racial codes. And then volunteerism by those same codes, seeing numbers oscillating in those upper 40s. And then finally, with ethnicity, so Hispanic Latino versus not Hispanic Latino by participation, interest, and volunteerism. This is special education status, that same set of questions. So not special education is blue and special education is green. And then this is polling, K-12 Insight did this data poll for us we asked students, they had an open-ended response, and some of the reasons why they were not interested, and so there was or why they did not participate. And so this is, again, why those who responded, who chose to respond, the 740 students. I would like to note that on this one, and I've heard multiple discussions, the idea of cost never came up with this group in terms of their verbatims. All right, and then Kay Marks is going to pick this up with our staff.
Jim, before you go.
I'm back.
Okay, last year I said pretty much the same thing about reading. Our reading scores are still, well, this year it went up 0.2%, correct?
Which graph are you looking at?
The first one. It went up 0.2%. My point is, it's not going up. What kind of interventions are we looking at into? What do we have in place? Could we overhaul the whole reading thing and figure out something new? Because we're not going to meet a goal if this does not happen.
So when you look at the reading scores, and you look at the rate of the overall accountability or the student achievement, you get a score that tells you how many or what the percentage of students is that is meeting the standard. And that's where we're challenged as a district. But when we look at our 13 elementary schools, we see that 10 of them showed gains over the last year in terms of student growth. So what that says to us is that students are coming to us with a number of needs and a number of barriers to their learning. And one way that we assess whether or not we're making progress with students is through that student growth score. So we're seeing that students are learning. We're just not getting them to standard just yet. And we think if we continue with our school improvement plans and our targeted interventions and maybe have a look at some of the materials that we're using, we may be able to make more progress. But I think I want to go back to that slide where you look at the number of students who are coming to you, in poverty, and how that affects where they start. Doesn't mean where they're going to finish. But, we're looking at that student progress and that growth factor to see whether or not the instruction that they're getting is making a difference. And we're seeing that it is. Now the next thing is to get them to the standard. And that's something that, everyone across the state is facing. Jim, can you go over that statistic that you often use in terms of the number of students in Wisconsin who are proficient in both math and reading?
Yep, it's around, off the top of my head, it's like low 30s, right around 30%.
Mm-hmm. Who are either not proficient in reading or math.
Yeah, I can actually find that number for you in a few moments. But it's low, it's very low.
Okay, on to the staff component, talking about all the people that work very hard to make all the things you already heard about actually happen. So the slide before you now talks about the staff engagement survey. This happened about 1.5 years ago, and as you can see, about 85% of our staff are either highly engaged or engaged here in the district in the work that they do. So that's a great statistic, and obviously we'll work to continue to improve upon that, but overall we're pleased with that. When we look at staff statistics in the district, and Dr. Hardebeck talked earlier about teacher quality and equality within the district, we look at multiple things. We look at the education that teachers have, we look at their experience within the district, we look at the mobility that they have here within the district, and their certification. And so we'll start out by looking at the hires by licensure and looking at a 5-year comparison. So if we go all the way back to 2010-11, we hired 52.3 FTEs that year. The top 2 areas that we hired, like in the areas of licensure, were elementary and special ed. You can see the FTEs that we hired there. And so for an example, out of those 52.3 FTEs in that year, we hired 13 of those in the elementary licensure, which represented 7.26% of all elementary positions in the district. In 2011-12, there was 61.7 FTEs that needed to be hired. Again, elementary was the highest that we needed to fill at 6.58% of all those positions. And then right after that was elementary childhood at 6.6 FTEs, or 14.83% of all of those positions. Moving into 12-13, which was some of the aftermath of the Act 10 legislation, we were looking at filling 92.8 FTEs in the district. 17.5 of them were in the elementary area, and then another 7.6 were in early childhood. And following that up with just last year in 2013-14, we filled 63.6 FTEs. Again, elementary being one of the highest, and then special ed following that with 15 and 10.1 FTEs. Then this year, again, which will only count from statistically July 1 of 2014 to the present, we hired 53.6 FTEs. Again, elementary and special ed being two of the highest licensure areas at the reflective percentages you see there. But overall, in the past 5 years, we've hired 324 FTEs. If we look at the most hired licenses in the past 5 years, no surprise that elementary, special ed, and early childhood are up in the top 3 based upon the previous slides we just saw. In addition to that, art education, music education, social studies, and English are up there as well. If we look at these, the elementary and early childhood are obviously specific to the elementary level. Special education, art education, and music education would be district-wide FTEs, and then social studies and English are secondary FTEs that we needed to focus on in terms of hiring within the past 5 years, those licensure areas.
Commissioner Hammack-Boyle has a question.
Sure. Is there a correlation to turnover? With the numbers of, if you look at elementary, special ed, early childhood education, the numbers of turnovers for the hires. So we could look at that as being those top 3, 4, 5 are where we have most people leaving, we have to hire more people.
Well, in addition to the fact that we just simply have more positions in those areas.
Okay. Thanks.
But one thing to keep in mind is that if you're working in elementary school, almost everybody in the school has elementary education as their endorsement. Whereas if you're at the high school level, you'll have a content area, you know. So you're always going to be hiring more elementary teachers than you are, you know, specific content area teachers.
Thank you.
Yep. Again, because this is by licensure, so that makes the difference there. When we look at staff count by position and location, if we look at the number of positions district-wide, this year in just kindergarten through 5th grade, you can see the FTEs reflective between those grades. Those FTEs make sense based upon our SAGE regulations in the district, that we would have a higher amount of FTEs in kindergarten through 3rd grade, and then as we get to 4th and 5th grade, those FTEs taper off as we no longer follow SAGE regulations. Our professional staff count by position and location associated with student count and funding. So before you is a list of all of the elementary schools, the FTE that's allocated for their building from a professional standpoint, and then the student enrollment. So the buildings are listed, as you can see, from student enrollment from highest to lowest. And then additionally, there's a column there that indicates whether or not that particular building receives either title and or SAGE funding. So if we take a look at Sherman, oh, can we go back a minute? That's okay. If you take a look at Sherman and Robbins, for example, obviously Robbins has got more student enrollment at 516 students, and Sherman has less. It's 474 students. But if you look at Sherman's FTE allocation, they have more staff allocated to their building, and that has to do with the title and SAGE funding that's allocated to their building to provide more resources. And you'll see that consistently as we go through some of the other information. Same type of information for the secondary levels. You'll see DeLong and North Star both have title funding allocated to them. When we look at district staffing in terms of ethnic and gender information, now this is district, this isn't just professional staff, so this would be all staff members in the district. A couple of key things that come to mind, Tim had talked about earlier and Jim had talked about things that pop out at us and kind of make us become more alert of things. And so we picked out a couple of pieces of information to share. And that's that the American Indian and Alaska Native population has shown a slight growth over the past 5 years. Nothing significant, but a small growth in those areas. Asian, Black African American, Hispanic, Latino, and Hawaiian Pacific Islander populations have shown little to no fluctuation in the past 5 years. Not surprisingly, compared to the other data you've already heard, nearly all district staff are white at 96.6%, and less than 1%, 0.23%, are of 2 or more races. And finally, females outnumber males in the district 3 to 1. Patty, can you slip forward just one more? No, forward, just skip, go forward one more, thank you. I just had them a little out of sync, and rather than confuse you anymore, we'll just skip forward one. So this staffing report has to do with the comparison of staff and student ethnic report. So way down on the bottom is that same 96.6% that we just talked about on the previous slide about the amount of district-wide staff members who are white. And in correlation with that, there's an 83% right next to that, and you'd heard that earlier in previous documents from my colleagues indicating that our student population correlates to that with an 83% white student population. Listed up on the screen there are schools that have staff members that work within them that whether they're there all day or for a portion of the day, there's staff members within the building that support our students who have an ethnicity or race other than white. And those schools are listed there. Yes, please. Thank you.
Rich.
Yes, go ahead, Chu.
Do you happen to know the ratio of how many minorities actually apply for these positions when they're open?
I don't, but we can get that for you.
Thank you.
Just overall, I can tell you that it's very minor. But we can get the data. Okay, professional staffing effort reports. When we look at the number of employees, and this has to do with the kind of the mobility of teachers within the district. So obviously over the past 5 years, you can see the new hires that we've had to the district. Again, that 2012 year, you can see the jump up to the 90. That again has to do with a lot of the Act 10 legislation that came through. Transfers within the district, so teachers moving from one position to another. The reassignments, those would be opportunities or situations where we have to move somebody, not necessarily that they wanted to move, but situations came up, and oftentimes it has to do with last-minute staffing to meet SAGE requirements right before the school year starts. And we've got things that are lopsided, too many staff in one area, not enough in another, and we need to reassign somebody to a different location. You can see that doesn't happen very often, and we work very hard for that not to happen, so we can have people where they need to be in a timely fashion. So we've worked hard to not have that be the case, but as you can see, it does happen on the rare occasion. We also do re-employ people into the district after they've officially left us, whether that's due to resignations and then they come back into the area or come back to the district, or through retirements, and then people come back to the district and work with us again after retirement. So that would be the re-employment column that you see there. When we look at the staff turnover rate that Chris was talking about earlier, you can see that in the past 5 years, the percentages are listed there for you. Retirements are reflective versus in terms of the FTE that have left us. So out of the 47.3 FTEs that left in 2010-11, 28 of those were retirements. And as of 14-15, we have nobody who's retired yet. So, Charles?
Do we project the pattern to be similar for retirement in the future?
I think that anytime we talk about retirement, it all has to do with what type of OPEB benefits are offered, and that always appears to be a driving factor in what your retirement statistics look like. We tend to see more people leaving the profession when benefits are either driving that or looking as if they don't have an option. And so anytime that we talk about retirements and the statistics for that, it usually coincides with whatever the benefits are at that point in time.
Charles, you want to use your user?
But we can look at the data to see what age the staff are and then be able to predict the numbers of replacement that we may be looking at.
Oh, you mean just in terms of how many retirements are coming up?
Correct, because of the age.
Assuming that everybody would, you'd have to make some assumptions in that data. We could say how many people are eligible for retirement during this year and this year, yep. Whether or not they would actually choose to retire, obviously, we can't predict that, but we could certainly, we do that. We have the data that looks at how many positions each year are eligible to retire.
So will the number of retirement be similar or higher in the near future?
It's usually right around the same. I mean, there usually isn't a lot of fluctuation in that. You can see in the 2011-12 year where there's 35 retirements versus the 25. Again, that was probably reflective of Act 10 and OPEB benefits at that point in time. But other than that, you're kind of in a 28 to 24 fluctuation. And I think from a district standpoint, that's pretty typical within that 25 to 30 ballpark. So I would anticipate, without knowing the numbers off the top of my head, that we would continue to see that same type of figure without any major changes to any type of benefit program. Again, when we look at the turnover rate and the
Mr.
reasons.
Hammock, well, did you have a question? Oh.
So the turnover rate is increasing. If you go back to the other slide.
Thank you, Patty.
I mean,
yes. Yep. I'm sorry, I was focusing on the retirements. I'm like, well, no, not really. But yeah, so when you look at the FTEs, yep, that FTE is increasing. Yep. The rationale that's been provided, obviously, since we've gone with the K-12 Insight survey that goes out to everybody that leaves us, we have much more data readily available to us. We didn't have that within the past 5 years for everybody, so this was a lot of manual going back to resignation letters and trying to figure out whether or not a rationale was provided. So in the instances in which a reason was provided, it's listed here, and you can see what those FTEs are. Obviously going from personal reasons, moving to another district, relocating, staying home with family. It varies depending on the staff. Another part of things that we look at when we look at teachers is their teaching experience in average years and what that means in our classrooms. So if we look at the elementary level, there's a range of the least amount of average teaching years within a building to the most amount of average teaching years within a building. And so before you there, you have both Locust Lane and Northwoods. So the average years of experience for the teachers in Locust Lane is 9.6, and Northwoods is 15.7, and all the other elementaries fall in between those two ranges. Middle school, it was almost kind of I chuckled putting it up there because they're virtually the same. North Star and South were tied at 14.4 for their average years of experience within their two buildings. And then DeLong, they blew them right out of the water at that 14.5. So Between all three of our middle schools, the average years of experience is pretty much consistent across the board. And then at the high school, we've got North at 13.9 years and then Memorial at 16. Prairie Ridge, Montessori, and McKinley were all pulled out separately just because you need a different certification in those three buildings, and they don't fall into the elementary, middle, and high school. So they were pulled out separately, but you can see their average years of experience between all staff members in their building.
Mr. Johnson.
Seems to be quite a wide range at the elementary schools. So do you look at that and compare it to, the success of students or the engagement of students and parents, or do you see any correlations between the years of experience and any sort of concerns in other areas?
That hasn't been something that we've looked at. Again, I think we've just kind of delved into a lot of the student data that we now have available to us. It's certainly something that we can look at, and maybe something that we should look at. But it isn't something that we've done to this point in time.
Well, I was thinking something opposite, that I'm pleased to see all the experience in the schools, that the average years are quite good. And I worry if we're just having all new hires, in one area, and we're not. We have teachers who are remaining in those classrooms, and we're benefiting from their experience. I don't know if you can, like you say, you haven't really directly correlated it to achievement, but I'm pleased to see those numbers.
Superintendent Hardwick.
When you look at the overall accountability scores for a school like Locust Lane, their overall accountability score was 69.8 with meets expectations, and Northwoods was 69.4. It's in the ballpark, but when you look at the level of growth at Locust Lane, it was at 81.8, and at Northwoods it was at 66.9. So, that younger group of teachers are certainly getting, great results from the students at Locust Lane.
Okay, so speaking of new teachers, Commissioner Duax, so this information reflects our current FTEs in each of the buildings, the new hires into buildings this year, and then what the percentage of that reflects. So for example, at Robbins, we've got 32.1 FTEs in the building. 5.3 of those are new to the building this year, which is 16.51% of their staff. And you can see that if you just look at that 2014-15 column, obviously we're ranging from 1 to 6.5 staff that are new in a building. And some of those buildings that have the 6.5 staff are pretty large buildings with a lot of staff, for example, Lakeshore and DeLong. So, you're concerned about one particular building or area being overwhelmed with a lot of new to the district teachers with less experience. I don't think that that's the case. So, nope. Okay. Again, when we look at teacher education and college degrees within our teaching staff, currently we have 19 teachers who either hold 48 credits above their master's or their PhD. We have 440 teachers who are currently holding an earned master's degree, and 394 teachers who have a bachelor's degree. And that totals our 853 teachers from a head count standpoint in the district. When we look at support staff in the district, again, just things that kind of pop out. If we combine the assistant cooks, first cooks, and cooks, we've got 36.8 FTE. Combine all of the different positions of custodians that we have, we're looking at 68 FTEs. Our bilingual education assistants are at 15.5 FTE. Our general school assistants, we've got 51.6 FTE. And then our special education assistants in the district represent 80.1 FTEs. This is a similar slide to what you saw earlier, only this represents our support staff within buildings. Again, buildings listed on the left, from largest population of schools to the smallest, and then the title and SAGE funding that represents those districts. Same information for the secondary levels. When we talk about recruitment initiatives in the district, things just over the years in general from a recruitment standpoint have changed a lot with the introduction of electronic applications, online, electronic everything. So in the past, where there used to be a multitude of different recruitment fairs and hiring opportunities to go to throughout the state to try and go and meet face-to-face with people and recruit, those just don't happen as regularly as what they used to, because the attendance at them was dwindling. And so now the state is down to one actual recruitment fair, and that's what they consider to be WERF, the Wisconsin Educator Recruitment Fair. We do attend that. We take a representative group of building principals along with me to go to that each year down in Madison, and we meet with literally hundreds of applicants. It's a whirlwind day, and everybody that goes in attendance with me is very tired at the end of the day, but it's an excellent opportunity for us to get in front of potential new staff members in the district. We additionally advertise all of our postings and vacancies on WeCan, which is the Wisconsin Education Career Assessment Network. Currently there are 8,214 active members on that site. For anybody who's into education, WeCan is known as the place to go to look for a job if you're in education in Wisconsin, and so that is the place that we post all of our vacancies. Additionally, we work with the UW-Wisconsin placement offices, particularly with positions that are very challenging to fill. For example, UW Stout, who is historically known as the institution to work hard to produce high-quality tech ed teachers. You know, I think every HR director in the state probably has a first-name relationship with those placement officers, just because you're trying 3 years before people even graduate to get a connection with folks. So we have those connections, as well as for some of our really challenging positions, more in the pupil services area, University of Minnesota's website, different state association websites, and then different listservs for, again, those challenging positions like a school nurse. For our support staff, again, we use WeCan. We use all of our public notices and media outlets that we have the opportunity and access to use, and then we've connected with CVTC to work closely with them for any opportunities that they can connect us with to be able to recruit more opportunities for support staff. And I think that was our last one.
Commissioner Hammond-Boyle.
I was just wondering, would it be possible to add the National Board Teacher piece to the teacher education college degree part so that they know how many National Board teachers we have in our district? Thanks, Kay.
Absolutely.
Thank you very much, Kay, and for the others. Any other? Commissioner, yes, you had a question.
Just a general questions. The vision statement indicate that all children in the district are prepared for post-secondary success. When I look at the previous slide, I notice we have a few green bar for the different expectation. But what are the ideas of green bar for post-secondary success and college enrollment? What are the thinking on that?
Well, the thinking for whether or not a student is on track, and that's what we call it, on track for post-secondary success, has to do with those foundational markers. Third grade reading, 8th grade mathematics, the reading scores on the ACT at 10th grade. Those are all predictors of whether or not students will meet the requirements to graduate. In addition, there are two other factors that are also very important in terms of whether or not students are meeting or on target for success. And one is attendance. And as a district, we're getting right up there, right around 95%, which is kind of an outstanding attendance rate. But discipline is the other. So, for example, if you have a student who has missed one of those achievement markers, either in math or reading, has discipline referrals in a content area course, a core course like math, reading, social studies, science, or they have attendance issues, those students are at risk for not graduating. And so those are the kinds of criteria that we need to monitor very closely for all students at all grade levels.
My observation has been that from grade 1 to 9, students tend to do well. But after that, they begin to suffer academically. And if that is the case, university can be a far dream to be rich, because the criteria to get into higher education, including CVTC, has always been that ACT and class rank are the number 2 criteria to get in college. So I wonder if we can even attempt to set a bar, the green line, I'm talking about the green line, to establish a line, a benchmark that we want to shoot for, in addition to looking at indicator from lower level. Maybe we might want to take a challenge for the other end.
And I agree with that. I mean, that's one of the things that we've asked schools to do in terms of setting their goals for their school improvement plans, is to set the bar higher. But we put so much emphasis on reading and math, because without that foundation, students can't go on to excel at the higher levels. So when we look at our achievement data overall as a district, we see we're making growth, and our accountability scores are, pretty good at the elementary school. We see an uptick when they get to high school in terms of, overall student achievement and some improvement in the overall accountability score. But where we're seeing it be a little bit flat is at the middle school level. And kind of having conversation in terms of what's been happening at the middle school level, we see that model has been in place for many, many years. And we may need to look at how we use time at the middle school, how we're creating interventions for kids, that kind of thing, so that they don't, fall off the tracks, as you said, after elementary school.
Other comments or questions? Mr. Cummings?
I am just incredibly appreciative of this report. We've never got anything like this. It's obviously an amazing amount of work on everyone's part, and to get it all in one, and data that we've never gotten before, we weren't able to get, and then to get it all in one piece and not have it piecemealed is just phenomenal. So I'm very grateful to everyone involved.
I would agree, and it's a lot to absorb. Commissioner Hammack-Boyle.
I would agree as well. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Duex.
Well, thank you for this report. Like Commissioner Cummins said, we've never had anything this thorough before, so we're very, very appreciative of this information. I just wanted to make one comment that because of my background growing up in South Texas on the Mexican border, I was a minority student. I didn't think about that at the time, but it's really influenced my life in many, many ways. And having taught at the university for many years, where we talked a lot about diversity and the lack of it. I don't want to let that slide here because we have, what did you say, 96% white people living here. So in living in Eau Claire, it was a very big issue for me to stay here and raise my children here because I thought, how am I going to teach them some of the lessons that I learned as a youngster? I have found that people are so accepting here and concerned about education. So it really did my heart good to see the variety of teachers that we have in our district, because I think that's one of the most important things, is that we at least can hire people who have varied backgrounds. And I have seen school districts where people grew up in that district and went right back into that district and into that college and just had a limited view of the world that way. So I appreciate the hiring that's being done here. Thank you, Kay, and your staff. And thank you to the DLT. It's very important that we have a varied experience and that we appreciate all the people that put time in for our kids.
Thank you, Commissioner Dwex. Hannah?
So since the vision statement, like, it really is pushing for post-secondary success, and one of the statistics was about AP courses and the enrollment in that. Would it be possible to get information about why students did not choose AP courses? Like, if they chose not to take them because they were afraid they would harm their GPA, and they wanted to have the opportunity to have a higher GPA to get accepted into colleges, whereas schools who have weighted grades might not have to worry about that as much and don't have to have their class rank or their GPA in consideration quite as hard as it is here, where you're still on the 4.0 scale, even though you're taking an AP course, which is much more difficult.
And it's an excellent question, Hannah, in that we do have some survey data. If you were in an AP class, you may remember taking the survey that we gave about why students do take AP and why they choose not to take AP. And sometimes the lack of a weighted grade for AP does come up, but it can work both ways. That students will avoid sometimes those weighted credits for the very reason that you're talking about. One thing I think that students need to keep in mind is that when colleges are determining who to accept, they pretty much do their own rankings, and they do away with those grade point averages to some extent, taking into account which schools weight grades and which schools do not. So it becomes a little bit more of an even playing field for students. But we can get some information for you.
Any comments from the public on the committee report? No? Okay. All right. Excellent report. Thank you to staff and administration for providing this. It's lots of great information for us. We do have one more committee report. I know it's getting late, but we've had this for a little while, so I think we'll go ahead. It's a report on the school calendar, and Kay, I believe you're presenting this. Okay.
Okay, so school calendar discussions. We've had a lot of them. The school calendar committee. Patty, if you can go to the next one, thanks. That's okay. It's hard to not be able to drive and talk at the same time. So our school calendar, our calendar committee for the district has a 24-member total. You can see that it's reflective of elementary teachers and administration, middle school teachers and administration, high school teachers and administration. There are district office teaching and learning representatives on the committee, as well as district office administration. So This group has been working together. Many of the committee members are repeat committee members year after year, so there's some consistency and continuity on the group. So things that have been discussed about previous calendars or things that we needed to work on or feedback that we got after a certain calendar was created and put out, having some of the same people work together has been very beneficial in moving things forward. So I appreciate all the work that the people on this committee do. It's not necessarily one of the most favorable committees for people to be on because you can never please everybody, and this is one of the committees that people find that that's very reflective in. So I appreciate all the work that everybody puts into this committee because it is a lot of hard work.
Okay, have you considered having parents on the committee?
We did consider that, and rather than actually having a representative on the committee, we sought out input from the Parent Advisory Council, or Advisory Council, and you'll see that reflected as we go through. But part of that, I think, is just that the challenge of being able to get people here for those meetings, and that then you kind of lose some of that continuity because people aren't able to be at meetings. And so we thought if we could go to them in terms of presenting the information that the committee came up with to the actual group and have a representative group from everybody that's at PAC versus one or two people who sit on the committee, that would probably be a better idea. So the focus for the 15-16 school calendar. There was several things that we focused on. One of the things was collaboration time for teachers and having that collaboration time being placed at conducive times throughout the calendar so that we could provide for improved instruction and analyzing data. Now, in doing this, what we found was that that doesn't always look the same for everybody. So there may be times in the calendar that is brought forward in which high school may be in session where elementary, middle school wouldn't be. Those times are minimum, but they are reflective of being important for teachers to have specific times throughout the year which reflect their academic calendar, which is different for semesters versus trimesters. And so that's the rationale for the difference between that time. We also looked and focused on meeting the legislative requirements of hours versus instruction, or hours of instruction versus days of instruction. As you know, that changed as of late. You can see there that the elementary hours requirement is 1,050 and the secondary hours requirement is 1,137. So there's been a difference in what's been required all along. And so in looking at being able to move forward and have more of a focus on how much time we spend versus how many days we spend has really kind of changed how we look at things. Part of how we changed how we looked at things in correlation to hours and days went for accounting for inclement weather days. So in the past, when we had to account for days of instruction, anytime there was an inclement weather day, it was known as a makeup day. Now that the focus is on hours of instruction, we've worked hard to incorporate time into the calendar so that we meet not only the minimum requirement of hours, but then exceed that so that we have excess time built in. So in the event of an inclement weather day, we would have a cushion and we wouldn't have to consider quote unquote makeup days because we have hours of instruction built into the calendar. To be able to get to that point, though, we need to look at adding some additional time to both the middle school and high school instructional days. At this point in time, we're looking at a minimum of 18 minutes at the middle school and a minimum of 14 minutes at the high school. In doing that and adding that time into their instructional periods, we'd be able to build in that additional time to account for those inclement weather days. By doing that, that'll build us in some cushion of time. The elementary school, they had already met that minimum requirement and it exceeded it by plenty of time. So there's no need to change, to look at changing that. The other thing that we looked at was having an earlier end to the school year. Not surprisingly, after the past 2 winters we've had, I think people, both parents and staff, are growing weary of seeing the school year stretch on and on when we have to tack on 4 days of makeup time at the end of the year. So the input and feedback that was sought out had a very clear focal point of having the school year end earlier than what it had been. And so by being able to focus on hours of instruction versus days, we're able to do that. So the action steps that the committee took was to have discussion and gather input from the variety of entities you see there. Obviously the calendar committee. We did take this information to the Parent Advisory Council about a month or so ago, maybe a little bit more. Same information has been shared with district principals, the district leadership team, and very peripherally student transit, just to kind of lay the groundwork that, you know, some potential modifications may be coming, and to start to get the ball rolling about thinking about what that might or might not look like. Additionally, there was information that came out of the committee about school start times or school day start times. This information's been informally discussed in the district for several years. It came about in the parent survey of both 2012-13 and then again in the 13-14 survey. And then again, information and feedback sought from the committee, the PAC, the principals, the DLT, and student transit related to the potential modification of start times flipping. So secondary would be starting their day later, elementary would be starting their day earlier, and what that looks like in the district. So there's been conversation with all of these groups and entities about the potential of that occurring and any feedback that they have about those things. Overall, the positives that we've heard in terms of pursuing something like this would be actually giving some credence to student sleep patterns, because there's a big difference obviously between a senior and a first grader and the sleep patterns that they have. Student motivational levels between those different grade levels and the time in which their school day starts. Childcare for elementary parents, indicating that the way that most of our schools are set up now for working parents, in most cases they have to secure childcare at the beginning of the day and the end of the day, because the school day doesn't start or stop far enough on one end or the other for them to be able to not have to get childcare on both ends. So if we potentially looked at starting elementary school earlier, that could possibly alleviate the need for childcare in the morning. And then safety on the street for student drivers was another positive that came out of information that was shared from different groups, being that if the secondary students were starting later in the day, they would be more safe in their driving patterns. And I believe there's actually research that the group found to support that. So that wasn't just a bunch of seniors or juniors trying to promote their claim that they didn't need to come in as early as what they are currently.
Commissioner Johnson.
I was very excited to sit down yesterday and read that great long study that we got, but it was only the even pages. So I don't know if everybody only got even pages and not odd pages. Right. If we could get it by email or have it posted on board docs or something so we can actually read that study, I'm really excited to read it.
We can post that on board docs. It looks like some people got the full study and some people got half the study.
Well, half would have been better than every other page, because at least I could have read the first half.
Questions that came up from the different entities that we worked with and talked about this potential modification was obviously busing. What does this do to the busing in the district? How does it affect extracurricular participation for students at the secondary level if they're getting out later? Student after-school jobs, again, for the same reason. An overall question about 3- and 4-year-olds on the bus during late afternoons. Currently, some of our 3- and 4-year-olds are getting home 5:30 in the afternoon. And so if we looked at switching things, that could potentially be a positive for the most youngest kids that we serve. And then the big question that everybody's asking is research. What does that research say? And so I think that at this point in time, that's where we're at, is having the feedback from all of the groups, people being interested. You saw in the executive report that the parent group was supportive of, starting this conversation and pursuing information. Building principals were supportive, and the DLT was as well. So obviously, kind of as we talked about earlier, this isn't a committee where you're going to please everybody, but from the people that we've talked to and the information that we sought out to this point, it appears as if the entities are receiving feedback that says that they're interested in us pursuing this, which led us to bring things to the board at this point in time for now your input.
Okay, let's get input from the board on the topic. Commissioner Johnson.
Well, I would assume that administrators in this room probably have opinions about the research. I mean, I think we've seen it in the national media, and we've seen a lot of, sharing of current research. So I guess my perception of what I've been reading in the national media is that the research says that high school kids or secondary kids generally will perform better if their school day matches their sleep pattern. So is there research that says we shouldn't do it?
I don't know that there's research that says that you shouldn't do it. I think, part of determining whether or not you're going to change start times really depends on kind of the will of the community and whether or not they can support those start times based on the research that you see. What we heard in the PAC committee was a lot of conversation, kind of anecdotal things about issues in getting child care, at both ends of the day, as Kay described, or the problems of getting your 16-year-old out of bed at 6 a.m. in the morning. And I think probably we would hear from high school teachers that, as the day goes on, probably the engagement rises a little bit for older students. But there's a lot of details that will need to be worked out. The coordination perhaps with, some of the private schools that are served by, the busing that we provide, whether or not, logistically, we can serve schools in a flip schedule. Everything from how student practices are organized after school. I mean, it's all doable. But you really have to think, do you have the support within the community to make those changes? And how do you go about gauging that support?
I guess maybe those are rhetorical questions, but I would think that, first of all, we would need to share that research. And so if we've got some good, solid research that, when we're looking at moving those bars to the green lines, we talk about what gets in the way of kids succeeding. And so we've done things for decades on, food. If kids are hungry, we feed them at lunch, and now we feed everybody at breakfast if they want to come and eat it. Sleep is another, obviously, variable that can get in the way. And so the more variables and the more barriers we can remove for kids, I think we need to share the research with the community. And if in fact it's going to be good for kids, I think the key probably with the community is just giving them enough time to adjust. And so if we're, making decisions now, they're going to, then, or a couple months from now, then they're going to have time to, figure out, okay, I don't need before school care, but I'm going to need maybe longer hours of after school care, or, to make those sorts of adjustments. So I guess those sharing the information on why it's important and then giving the community the time they need to adapt to it, I think would be important.
I looked through that document that we got, and I think the research is fairly clear about the academic benefits. What I found though interesting about the document was there were actually a variety of ways to implement it. Not all of them were just a simple flip. And I think that's something that I think we would need to look at, or a committee or a calendar committee or whoever, to see what fits for us and what fits with our community the best way to do it. Because there isn't just, I mean, I only saw one or two in there, I think, that actually just simply flipped them. They did other ways to do it also, and I think that's really important to look at and to make sure we get that right. And the other thing was, the outstanding piece that I saw in there in that research was, or in that document, was that it said a lot of people had fears, and after the first year they realized most of their fears were not as founded as they needed to be. So, yes, Commissioner Hambuck-Boyle.
I think there's some research too with the little ones on the less transitions in a day, not so much childcare, and that they just have less transitions in a day, which is helpful for the little ones all the way around. And there is good research to show that.
Okay, any other comments? We really need to think about, do we want to give more direction to administration or calendar committee? Do we want them to actually look at different options? Thoughts on this? How would you like to move forward? We could certainly start thinking about it more seriously with options and so forth, or what? Commissioner Duax.
Is the calendar committee, they've done some study on it, they've looked at different ideas. Are they prepared to do further study and make a proposal, or would you like to see that come from another area?
You mean if the board would decide to move forward, would it be the calendar committee who would do that work? I think that it would make sense for that group because they've been, as I said, the same people historically working with the calendar. There's a lot of knowledge there and a lot of expertise in terms of what the district has done, what we're looking to do, and how any modifications to that would fit in.
Well, we have to start somewhere.
And added to that, it was members of the calendar committee who located that research that was sent to you. So, you know, they've kind of put their toe in the water a little bit in terms of looking at that issue. I think what we're looking for you, what I'm looking for from you is, you know, this is a study that would create a lot of conversation, a lot of research, a lot of kind of floating ideas and getting feedback. And is this something that you want to pursue? And that's where we need some, I think we're at a point where we need some direction from the board. And I know that you're not prepared to vote tonight on that, but at some point we would like to have a directive in terms of what is the board's will on this issue.
So my question for the board is, do you want at some point to move forward with this and at least have a vote on it, or give stronger direction? I've always felt strongly about this issue for myself personally, that I think it's an important thing to look at and do. But I don't want to, and it's clear Commissioner Johnson feels pretty strongly about it also, but I want to make sure enough of the board feels this way, that we should give enough, you know, give this direction to the calendar committee. So, Commissioner Jean.
Well, for the year and a half that I've been listening to this conversation, I'm very interested in moving forward with this as well.
Commissioner Cummins.
You know, definitely the research is out there, but my concern is, how does it fit in our overall board goals, and how does it fit in what we're directing administration to do with the limited time that they have? We have so many initiatives going on right now. There's research out there that says a lot of things. There's research that's out there that says you should really be increasing your children in poverty's AP participation. There's research out there that says we should be looping our students, especially at the middle school level. I mean, you can find research in any area. There's research that says that we should really be breaking down disciplines and teaching things in a more project-based. There's a lot of things that I would put before start time, and the data is very clear about student achievement and student engagement. And that's my only concern, is so we're going to pick this one thing, and we've got a little bit of energy around it, and then we're going to use our very valuable resources of our administrative time. Is that the best bang for our buck? Is that what we went to something Commissioner Craig and I years ago, where they gave us the 5 things that boards can do that have the highest impact for the least amount of money. Start times wasn't in there. And it's just, the list is pretty big right now. So that's my concern, is that it needs to fit, and we need to be very intentional about what we're directing administration to do. Is this the #1 thing on our list?
Okay, thank you. Other questions, comments? Commissioner Duax?
Well, I have my reservations too about the amount of time we want to spend on this. I think if the interest is compelled, if we're compelled to study this, I can go with that, but I'd like to hear the board discuss other initiatives that they'd like to put ahead of this. You know, I like to prioritize some things before I vote positively.
Me too. I also like to see that this topic align with the goals of the Board of Education. There are 3 goals. And if we were to prioritize our resource, I'm afraid time may not be one of them, unless we're able to demonstrate that it aligns with our goals.
Commissioner McBoyle.
So I'm hearing that we should really take this back to work session or whatever. I really would like to know the priorities that are coming out of the DLT to see where this fits within that piece as well. And I think, Trish, you were saying that too. So.
Well, I feel like this does fit with our first goal, which is about academic achievement, but I do hear the question about priorities, about different initiatives we could take. So am I hearing that maybe perhaps you'd want this in a work session to discuss multiple initiatives to prioritize, or is that the kind of thing I'm hearing next, or what? Yes, sorry, Commissioner.
Definitely, but also, you know, we set the goal, we set the vision, and then really it's up to our leadership to get us there. And so what Commissioner McBoyle said about what is DLT currently working on, because based on the report that they gave us tonight, I can think of a million things that they're working on. And I would want to hear what they need from the board to bring about the vision. And if they feel that start times is, you know, one of the top 3 things that they want to focus on, that they think that the results are going to be amazing, I'd really want to hear that from the professionals. So if that could be in a joint work session, if we could hear what were the big red flags, or not necessarily just red flags, but points of focus from the opening schools report, and how their year is planned out in terms of what information they were surprised to see, what information they want to strengthen, and then if this fits in there. But otherwise I feel like we're just piling one more thing on top, because it's, and not that it's not important, and not that it's not, you know, the research is there, but it's not just a quick fix. So I just would like to see in a joint session how it fits with, and who would actually be doing the work.
Okay, so so just to restate, so like you would at least like to hear a recommendation from administration on these priorities and where it fits in for them. Okay. Others, comments? I'm not sure if I have a consensus on this or not yet. Commissioner McBoyle.
Well, I think it's not like it shouldn't be part of the conversation, but where does it fit? And certainly too, if the kids, high school kids, start later, maybe they take more AP classes. I mean, that's a stretch, but I mean, there are some correlations here that could be looked at. And I love the fact that it got brought up, and that we got to read about it, and that we're more knowledgeable about it. And you know, now we have to figure out where it fits in with the people who run the district.
Thank you, Chris. That actually made me think of another thing in the report. One of the options that came out when we talked about taking more AP classes is that they actually gave more flexibility to seniors, that they could come in early if they wanted to take a course, but maybe they need to sleep in and they could start the second hour, and that allows more options maybe for taking AP courses. So things may not be mutually exclusive as we're thinking about. So maybe that's the kind of discussion we need to have and get guidance from DLT on how those options might come out. So it sounds like we should go back and look at that information we were provided and think about those options and become more educated about it. And then it sounds like we should have a discussion with the administration about that, and maybe things aren't as mutually exclusive as we may be thinking of them. Does that sound reasonable? Maybe in a work session doing that? Okay. All right. Any comments from the public on this issue? We have 6. Okay. Thank you. Any requests for future agenda items? I think we got a couple within that report before. All right, no other business. Do I have a motion to adjourn?
I do.
A second from Commissioner Vu. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.
This program was recorded and presented by Chippewa Valley Community Television. Chippewa Valley Community Television is made possible by continuing community support. If you would like to volunteer or make a donation, you can contact us by calling 715-839-5067 or on the web at www.cbctv.org.